is a weird country. It's weird because I have a theory about weirdness in Japan and why everyone thinks Japan is weird. To be honest, I never expected that I would work in Japan. I was learning Japanese just to have fun with my friends, to watch more anime without subtitles. But looking back and how everything worked out so well, it's definitely one of the best choices that I made. It's your ikigai.
It's not just a job, it's more the way of your life. So Fatim, Diallo, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. So you are professional PR advisory. You advise tech and financial firms in Japan. So could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, of course. Like you said, my name is Fatim. I'm Mali, West Africa born, Switzerland raised, Canada educated, American woman living in Japan for the past 6 years. And I was originally interested in Japan because I was interested in the culture. I was watching all the animes and I had friends.
What's your favorite anime?
Oh, I can't choose. It's like choosing children. But recently, I think I'm just a follower of the most recent trends. The last anime that I watched or followed was Jujutsu Kaisen, maybe like a year ago. I don't watch it anymore. Recently, I've been watching a lot more movies, like animated movies. I watched one, I think it's called Perfect Blue.
Perfect Blue. Oh, yes.
It was really, really good. Yeah.
So you were interested in anime?
Yeah, I was interested in anime, and then my mom's colleague in the same office was Japanese. So I spent a lot of time with her kids after school, and they would make, very basic Japanese food like omurice or curry, and it was so good. So I started to teach myself Japanese. I spent 2 summers as a teenager in Kyushu and Saitama with, just very, very normal Japanese homestays, and it was amazing. Everybody they were so welcoming and kind and had really, really good, I would say, like omotenashi.
What's omotenashi?
Omotenashi is, I think, this belief that, you just open your arms and door and heart to someone and you show them a lot of grace and welcome them. I don't know if that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's correct, but
that's how I think about it.
Because is it different from hospitality?
I think it's a step further. But I really think it's something that needs to be studied. So growing up in Switzerland, we take hospitality very seriously. We have some of the best hospitality schools in Switzerland. It's a very highly seen profession and education. Japan doesn't really have that, but it would be really amazing if they had an omotenashi university where people all around the world could come and learn about what makes Japanese version of hospitality so unique and so impactful. It was enough to make me want to come back over and over and over again. And I've traveled to over 50 countries.
Wow.
Not everywhere I've been has had that.
And now you're living and working in Japan. Is it a dream come true moment for you?
To be honest, I never expected that I would work in Japan. I was learning Japanese just to have fun with my friends, to watch more anime without subtitles. But looking back and how everything worked out so well, it's definitely, one of the best choices that I made for myself. Yeah. And it started when I was an exchange student at University of Tokyo, and I was inspired by seeing, people really seriously consider building careers in Japan. And I also, decided, okay, I'm going to intern, have an idea of what it's like to be a foreigner working with Japanese colleagues in Japan before I commit. So I spent about 6 weeks interning with a public affairs PR firm. It was an amazing experience, and so I came back and worked for that firm as well.
Great. So since you're a PR special, you're good at telling stories.
Yes.
So today's topic will be about going beyond the weird Japan narrative, because I myself, I live in Japan right now, but at the same time, I've lived in the United States. And I feel that stories in the media talk about, those weird Japan, about the toilets, robot restaurants, or a lot of weird things are happening in Japan. But I feel there's something different happening right now in Japan. And we want to uncover that and read the stories of real Japan, not only the positive side, also the negative side. So start with a general question. How do you feel, is Japan in a change right now? Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think 100% Japan is in a really positive change right now. The business, economy, even a lot of the like regulations and policies, and beyond that, and like the arts even, there's a really a lot of optimism, and not only in Japan on the ground, but overseas, there's a lot of interest for Japanese content, for Japanese ideas. So there's a good energy right now around that. I've noticed with the work that I do and just living in Japan that first, long-standing issues of deflation seem to be over, and as a consequence, I think wages are finally rising.
Yes.
And there's the idea that they're going to continue to rise, which is really good for a healthy economy. So, I think about it, even for myself, I work in a foreign firm, so a gaishike.
Yes.
So it's slightly different from a regular Japanese company. But even in my career now, I feel like the sky's the limit, and there's so much opportunity, and things can really go far. I never really had that feeling in the early years, I think, when I first started working here.
So why is that? What happened in Japan?
Why is it that it's happening now? I think it's a mix of companies starting to realize they need to do more. They need to think more about, really getting growth and, giving back to their shareholders. I also think, with the yen, the weak yen as it is, that's also had opportunities. Japanese firms are making like record earnings simply by having some of their business be overseas and by the yen being weak and
because
being
the
more
currency
exports.
gap, yes.
I know that people say, oh, well, if the yen readjusts, then all that growth is going to, disappear. I don't believe that that's going to be totally the case. I think, there are some really good changes happening on the ground as well. So, yeah, there's optimism. It's not all perfect at all, but there's optimism. I think on the political side, I know a lot of the world has had like very dramatic changes in leadership over the last few years. But I think over the past year in Japan, there's been a lot of stability. That's also helped to make people reconsider Japan as a good place to come and invest money.
You advised the governor of Tokyo, so
So in the past, I worked with Japanese government organizations, various ones, on their external communications, not only to foreigners in Japan, but also overseas. And this is kind of what they've been saying for a long time, that Japan is a really good place for them to bring investments, but also for exchanges and all these programs. And now finally, I think the world is hearing it and seeing it. And then the final thing is, I think that there has been efforts in the last year or two from the Japanese government to make things a little bit easier for foreigners. So whether that's the immigration quotas and regulation, but also with local governments are having really good incentives, like don't just go to Tokyo, but you can come and live in this area and work in this area. So there is a lot more effort, and I'm really actually quite impressed by some of the initiatives by the local governments.
How about startups in Japan? Do you feel a lot of startups are booming and growing in Japan?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a few people that are really, really, really innovative and really amazing. There's a lot of people that want to be innovative, but there's so much fear.
Right.
And part of it, I think, starts with education. I had a conversation once with someone. They said, well, the teachers are supposed to teach a specific curriculum. They can't just inject innovation just like that. It has to actually be part of a curriculum and part of a university degree. Is there some, there has to be a full story before it can trickle down to the students and become something that they think about or envision working there. But there are signs. I would say that, the image of Japan being just like salarymen and not very good lifestyle and like all these things.
Crowded trains.
Yeah, in the morning, and everyone's really depressed.
And wearing a great suit.
Or like, I guess especially right before COVID, there was a lot of pages of like the, what are they called, like Shibuya meltdown or whatever,
yeah.
with the drunk, like
people laying down.
People who
yeah.
didn't make the last train. I think that Japan is changing. There is an entrepreneurship spirit growing. It's surprising because it's not the youth, like it is in a lot of places. It's actually people who've had careers already.
That's an interesting point. It's not like the Gen Zs or the youth,
Yeah.
but also people in 40s or 50s.
And you kind of need those people to then come down to their kohais, their, you know, the people that look up to them and say, hey, I have another way, I have another idea. I've noticed it's kind of a follower society here, so being the first one is really scary, but as long as there's one person in front, I feel that most Japanese people that I know are really keen to follow and put a lot of energy behind it. But being that first one is like way too much of a burden, too much pressure.
Do you think this change happened in like a day or a night, or do you think it was a gradual change shifting from, you know, the old Japan to a kind of a new Japan?
I think things were gradually changing already. COVID just put it in boost. Yeah, I think COVID really, you know, things that we were flirting with, like, you know, I spent a lot of time, you know, reading and talking about online payments, different kinds of point of sales and transactions. We were already kind of in those discussions, and people were already thinking about how could we do QR payments, how could we do different kinds of online payments. And then with COVID, there was such a need for it that the people who were the naysayers and the questioning it just kind of stood up and said, let's do it, let's try it. That's another thing I think people misrepresent Japan as, like, sometimes to be slow or too stuck on the old.
Using fax machines.
Yeah, and it's true, but I think it's, like I said, about how you need someone to go in front of you. One of the companies that I worked at, you know, we were always in the office, and then the government was like, you have to go home. Everybody worked from home. And the first day, like, our company just didn't know how to use a lot of the tools and software and services. They had us, you know, sign in to Zoom at 9 a.m. And asked us to stay until 5:30 with a camera on Zoom using a pocket Wi-Fi, which is like portable data device.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody's pocket Wi-Fi like imploded because you can't be on a camera for that long. And within about 2 or 3 days, they said, okay, that's not going to work. We'll only use this software for like meetings and for specific moments. So yeah, it's okay to try things, to fail, to realize it's not going to work. I think also Japanese companies and Japanese society needs to find their own way of doing things. That's why so many Japan-born startups are really successful, because they know what is actually going to work in Japan. Don't let that limit you, though, because if you only think about Japan, you make a product that only works in Japan, you're really missing out on becoming a global unicorn or a global you know, enterprise.
Do you think Japan is a weird country?
Weirdly enough.
What's the most weirdest thing you encountered after you came to Japan?
Japan is a weird country. I have a theory about weirdness in Japan, and why everyone thinks Japan is weird. It's because Japan is a homogenous society where you think about the group.
Yes.
And so it makes it easy so when something is not following that for it to stand out in a weird way. Whereas in other places, there's a lot of weirdness.
Right.
Because there's a lot of weirdness, it's hard to tell where to look. You're like, I don't know where to look.
That is an interesting point.
Like, I think New York is really weird.
Absolutely.
But it's overwhelming, so you can't pinpoint it. But here, you know, if I go to Shinagawa and everybody's in a suit, and there's one person that's like, you know, out there, of course I'm going to be able to pinpoint that and show it.
Yeah.
I think another part of that, though, is like the Japan is weird image. In the past, I think it's been used positively, but now, at where we are now, I think it's limiting. Because if you think something is weird, then you think it's other.
Yeah.
And then you kind of don't look further than that, and you miss out a lot of the interesting culture and really interesting opportunities there. On the flip side, I think with Japan being the way that it is, that it's hard to be in a society where everyone expects you to look a certain way, act a certain way, behave. And when in reality, like most Japanese people are just regular human beings with emotions and creativity. If you have to hide too much of yourself to fit in the mold, it creates a lot of like issues and mental disorders. But also the positive side is that in that moment of tension, that's where all of the really, really interesting Japanese subculture, Japanese innovation, and Japanese weirdness is born. In that kind of like fighting back against it or fighting with it, like space. So it's kind of unique.
Yeah. So after living in Japan and you kind of learned the weirdness of Japan, did that change your perspective of Japan, or how you see anime? You got to understand the story better. How does living in Japan change your perspective?
Living in Japan changed my perspective, actually. I was raised in a quite different backgrounds with my African and American and in Switzerland. I think in Africa we have quite a, like where I'm from in Mali, village mindset, community mindset, but with, you know, development and with people moving out of the village into the cities, it's become a little bit more Americanized. It's become a bit more individualistic.
Interesting.
Right? That's what I've noticed. And so a lot of the same, we struggle with like the structures that help support people. If you lose your job or something happens to your farm, you have your family or your neighbors. In the city, we try to rebuild that, but it's not as easy. I felt that in Japan, it's almost similar to like there's like a wider, bigger village. Like we're all kind of like
the whole country is like a big
kind
village.
of like a big village. And it's like we're all in, at least in the public realm, in one village. You know, you have to look out for each other and make sure that we don't upset be quiet. Whereas other societies are a bit more like you, the individual.
Right.
I think that since moving here, I've seen all the benefits of, especially during COVID, all the benefits of being in a like society which is focused on the group.
Why is that? Because some people argue that that's what's stopping Japanese from being innovative, because people tend to, you know, kind of emphasize group interest before individual ones. So why is that a benefit?
For me personally, the group interest is a benefit because it means that there's a common kind of level of respect. And then I think if you start from a place of respect for people that you don't know, it's a lot easier to, you know, just build a life. And as a foreigner living in Japan, I think I can get away with not having to fit in as much. Of course, there's like norms and rules and manners that everybody should follow, but because I can get away with a lot of the, like, I don't have the social pressure, I find that the fact that people follow the rules and it's safe means that I can actually be more creative, take more risks with how I dress, what I say, you know, walking home at 2 a.m. alone, because I'm not worried about some of the other things that I'd be worried about. So that's why I think like living here, I've seen the benefits of like that system. But I know it's like it creates a lot of like ennui and difficulties for people. It's not easy if your whole life you've been told to act a certain way, and then all of a sudden someone's like, okay, think about what you would do outside of the society, like, and you realize that you haven't thought about it before. I took piano classes for 6 years with a very scary teacher, and I wanted to quit, but my parents put me in jazz piano for a year. And jazz piano is a lot of freestyle. And I was like, I can't freestyle. What do you mean? Like, I need to have a sheet music. I need to know what the song is, what's going on. It's the same feeling of like, you need to have had moments in your life where you had to freestyle, so that you know that you can do it.
Yeah.
But there's that fear, right? Maybe that's similar to, I think, what's going on with some of the startup communities, like complaints about that.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
It's like almost, the complaint is not anything wrong with Japanese society, but it's almost like, I wish I had the tools, or I wish I knew how to be more of a risk taker without getting fear of judgment from others.
Right. Let's talk about tourists, because Japan has welcomed a lot of tourists, and I can see that just walking in the streets, tourists are flocking into Japan, and like millions and ten thousands of people are coming. So what's your general impression? Is it a good opportunity for the Japanese community, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so first of all, I think locals here, including foreign and Japanese locals, seem to have forgotten what it was like, pre-COVID. In 2019, we had so many tourists. I remember, I guess I was part of the problem, because I had family, friends visit me all the time. And I went to Kyoto 5 times. I saw it in every season, always the same places. I can walk through Kiyomizu with my eyes closed. But even then, it was impossible to get accommodation. It was impossible to find restaurants with English menus. And it was hectic. And I felt that it was going to get more and more hectic. So we had those 2.5 years of a break. And I think in that process, people forgot that this was already written in the stars. Like, we had to always figure out how to handle this issue. Of course, someone says you can't have something, you can't come to Japan. Now you can, since October 2022. The rebound is going to be pretty intense. People who, have friends who have to cancel their tickets.
Yes.
So now they're like, oh, this is my chance. But it's had consequences. So I know that, there's over-tourism all over the world. It's something that people are constantly dealing with, because, the cons sometimes do outweigh the financial benefits of it, especially for local residents. What I've noticed in Japan is that there's been a negative, in fact, I would say it's not a negative impact, but it's created a new discourse around at which point does a place have to have tourists? Like, can we just say we don't want any and close the door?
Yeah, I've seen signs that say no foreigners. Like, literally they say that.
Yeah. And, of course, those people don't make a distinction between if you're living here or if you're not. So
do you get mistaken as a tourist sometimes?
Yeah, I don't really get mistaken as a tourist, because I don't really tour around. No.
Okay.
But if I go spend time in like touristy places, obviously everyone assumes I'm a tourist. I don't look Japanese. So I'm, very invested in this issue. Some of the issues that I've noticed is, like, especially recently, people have been talking about hotels, the price of accommodation if you just want to do local domestic travel in Japan. Obviously, during COVID, things were much cheaper, but the way that the prices have just gone up so quickly and very high, and then also the price gouging that's happening on websites geared towards foreigners, like maybe Booking, versus something geared towards Japanese, like Rakuten Travel. Same hotel, same room, but different packages, different prices, because they want to make sure that they, attract a domestic audience as well. So that kind of has a negative impact if you are someone who lives here, who works in Japan, makes your salary in yen, but you still want to explore the country and travel. And then also, I would say that there has been some cases where, it's frustrating as a local resident, and you want to go, oh, we don't want any tourists. But it's a good opportunity to actually step back and figure out, like, what steps can I take to help make the situation better? So, I think we can do better to educate the people that are coming here about manners and, this is what we do in Japan, this is not what we do in Japan. There should be better signage, about, a lot of things in Japan, people just assume you know.
Right. There's so many like hidden rules.
Yeah, people just assume you know.
Uh-huh.
And folks are not horrible. Like, if someone tells you something and shares it with you, usually people are quite happy to know.
Yeah, they understand and they follow the rules. Yeah.
And then the other side of that is, okay, not everybody knows how to use chopsticks, so maybe having some forks or spoons. Everybody has to make a little bit of an effort so that it's not uncomfortable. People have saved up a lot of money. They've traveled many, many hours to come here, and because at the base level, they're really big fans of Japan and Japanese culture.
Because they spend their time, effort, and money to come to Japan.
So if they've already made that effort, I don't think asking them to make a little bit more of an effort is going to be an issue, but I don't know if a lot of these people are being communicated to in the way that they understand. So foreigners in Japan also have an opportunity to help. We know why people come to Japan. We know why we came to Japan. So I think, there's a missed opportunity there. I've been enjoying all the TikToks and Japanese content because as someone who lives here and is just living, working their life, you sometimes forget that there are really, really amazing places. Yeah. It's a good reminder to be grateful,
So you traveled and lived in a lot of places in the world. So each country or each society has their own rules, their own way of doing things. But do you think Japan's especially different in that terms?
Japan is not especially different to a lot of places in Asia. There's a lot of similarities. They have a lot of the same views about, family and elderly and respecting certain things. Sometimes they have the same holidays. But Japan was an island that was closed off for many, many years. So there is a little bit of, things that developed in Japan that you won't see anywhere else. But I don't like the idea of saying, and this is something that sometimes I find that Japanese people tell me, that, oh, isn't this such a different place? When I first came here, everybody was like, oh my God, like, you must think it's so amazing here. It's so clean and orderly. And just from looking at me, they don't even talk to me. It's like, I came from Switzerland. This is pretty okay. Like, Japan is clean, but Switzerland is a lot more green.
Right.
And also safe and pretty clean. And at that point, Switzerland was very much advanced with recycling.
Yes.
We recycle glass bottles by color.
By color?
And so okay. Hearing someone say, it almost is like you need to look for areas of similarity between your place and other places and not difference. Like, that's where you should start the conversation. Oh, we also have really, really strict recycling policies. And then you find out, why is it so strict in Japan? Oh, because people are afraid that their neighbor is gonna, see them breaking the rule. and they don't want to be, get embarrassed. Yeah. In Switzerland, the government will charge you 300 francs fine if they do a random check and you have not organized your recycling.
Interesting.
So, there's different reasons why, but we start from a place of what's similar, and then we go, why is it different? Versus, oh, we're really different from you guys. I think that's the point of view that we should have when we talk about Japan. It'll make it easier also for Japanese people to relate to the rest of the world, instead of always being like, oh, we're really different.
We're different, we're weird. So let's talk about working in Japan, because I believe people are starting to, get interested in not just coming as a tourist, but like as a business professional. How's your life as a business professional in Japan?
I think my life is great in Japan as a business professional, but I think it's taken a while to really feel comfortable here as a business professional. There's this really great scene. There's a kids TV show called Sesame Street in the US.
Yes.
And there's this, I'll send it to you, but it's Big Bird in a meeting with a bunch of people, and Big Bird has a little notepad. That's how I felt. And I still feel that way in a lot of my interactions.
In the Japanese meetings?
In the Japanese meeting.
Okay.
Of course. And my first Japanese meetings, I did not know what was going on. Not only did I not know the words that people were saying, because my Japanese was not as developed, but there's so many unsaid things. And so many things hidden under layers and layers and layers of keigo, of formal Japanese
Explain
speak.
keigo, yeah.
I'm not going to explain it, I think, as well as my teachers at Tokyo University would want, but Keigo is basically a formal way of addressing people in Japanese, such as used in business and like certain social interactions. And Keigo is not only about putting somebody above you, but also about knowing how to put yourself beneath somebody else.
Right, that's the complicated part.
And that's the really complicated part. And I think learning about Keigo is valuable if you want to learn about how Japanese business society works.
Yeah.
One of the things is like I learned about is like it's not just hierarchy, but also circles. Like my team, my company is maybe a circle, and then my boss is above that in the higher. But then the client has their, junior staff, and then their senior staff. So how do these four groups orient themselves? And if you speak to the junior person at your company and the junior person at the other company, it's not the same way.
Because he or she is outside of the circle.
Outside your circle. And a lot of Japanese society is a lot of these overlapping circles. My neighbor and I, we really don't get along on most days because I'm loud. But we went to the neighborhood association meeting. All of a sudden, we were like brothers in arms. Because it was our building versus another building, and all of a sudden it's like this is our circle. So even though on a day-to-day basis we might not be the best of friends, there's definitely some loyalty there that falls in. So once you understand how that works, Keigo is really hard, but it opens a lot of doors. I used to speak Keigo to everybody.
Oh, so to make sure you're not rude to anyone.
Yeah, and also because I just thought it was just fun to see them confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to your story about the meeting. So you learned there's different layers in the meetings, and
definitely. The inside those meetings, I learned about different layers. I used to really focus a lot about my Japanese not being up to scratch. I changed my mindset around that, and I think foreigners coming to work in Japan should do this. If you're hyper-focused about Japanese, of course you should learn it. Like if I move to Croatia, I'd love to learn the local language. If you move to somewhere new, make an effort. It'll make your life easier. But there are millions and millions of fluent Japanese speakers in Tokyo. And any one of those people could be doing your job. Why are you here? What benefit do you bring? And it's not because they needed someone who had perfect Japanese. And I think in moments when you feel insecure about that, and I shouldn't apply to a job in Japan because my Japanese is not up to scratch, or I shouldn't even look at this opportunity because I'm not a native Japanese speaker or I'm not Japanese. If they wanted someone native or somebody, they could find that person very easily. If you have a multicultural, diverse background, there's so much opportunity for you here. People want to hear your point of view. They want to hear, how did it work in your country?
Right.
Can we try it here? Your colleagues, they might be fluent in English, they might not. Also want you to be there to make sure that their work is up to at the international level that it should be at.
I see. So do you feel Japanese people are more open to different cultures, different business?
I think increasingly they are. Every person's going to have a different experience. Every industry is quite different. But, one of the things I would say is I recently came back from Europe. So whenever I travel to Africa, to Mali or Switzerland, I have a moment of like readjustment when I come to Japan, because it is so homogenous and it really is kind of like, the cold water at the spa. So in the week that I've been back, I spent a lot of time looking around me to spot where are the foreigners. There's a lot of foreigners that just look Japanese, but at different services, like Filipino or Chinese. But this week I've been really looking out for the foreigners that look exactly like me. And on my walk home, like 2 days ago from the train station, I saw a service worker at a cafe, a student in the same cafe, maybe they were related, a construction worker, and a model doing a photo shoot, all within 15 minutes to my house. And I'm an office lady. So
Wow.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
it's not possible to
not
see,
possible.
if you have to really seek out people who are African, who are
Yeah.
Black in that community. So, like, yeah, that was really, I feel like it's changing a lot. So I don't want people to have those misconceptions about Japan.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception?
About Japan?
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many.
So many.
But I think recently, the one that I was really kind of taken aback by was on social media, there was all these videos, TikToks and Reels about really old Japanese people, like elderly oba-chan, oji-chans, working. And the reaction from the global international community was really like not what I expected. They were like, that's such a pity, that's so horrible, why can't she rest? You know, her whole body is tired.
Yeah.
Is it because there's no pension system? There's no family supporting these people?
I think I saw that video, like a fast food restaurant, there's an elderly person
It wasn't
working.
even like fast food, it was like, you know, like an omurice or like a bakery, like that kind of level, you know? The ones that we have in our shotengai, in our local city streets all the time. But we don't think much of it because they're always there.
Yeah, always there. So there were a lot of negative reactions.
There was a lot of negative reactions, and I think the misconception there is people don't understand, like, Japan has a very strong legacy and spirit of craftsmanship, monozukuri. You spend your whole life building those skills, perfecting that one thing.
Right.
And at a certain point, it's no longer a job, it's like your whole passion.
We call it ikigai in Japanese. But it's
your ikigai.
It's not just a job, it's more the way of your life.
In French, raison d'être. A lot of cultures have this, but right now I think the way that society is built up and it's so capitalist and so like, people have a hard time remembering that raison d'être, ikigai are concepts that, you know, mean a lot to some people. And we should be talking about it more. We should be exporting the benefits of those kind of mindsets, because a lot of other countries are having increasingly like aging society, aging population. They should stay active and happy if they have a passion, something to do. You shouldn't rely on your family or whoever to be keeping you going. You need to have your own interests and your own motivation.
And the reason to exist.
And the reason to exist.
Yes. So I think in Japan, people think of job as more giving your passion and the reason to exist. And it's about connecting to the community. So maybe we should address to the world that this is the Japanese way. Because I think there'll be a lot of people who agree to this.
Yeah. And I don't think everybody in the younger generation believes that, you know, you live to work. You know, I think the younger generation, my generation, does believe that, you know, you work to live. So take that trip, go to Okinawa, or so we do have differences of an opinion, but I never want to view the older generation in like a critical lens for having their ikigai. I think it's inspiring. Yeah.
Okay, so we need to wrap up, Fatim. So any final comments for our viewers?
Just very quickly, I think a lot of mid-career senior professionals would find Japan a great place because it's safe and there's a good quality of life here. There's so much to offer with culture and nature, but there are some real barriers, and one of them is language.
Yes.
I think people are always surprised. They always tell me, wow, I'm really surprised by the level of English, especially in a city like Tokyo, because you always compare it to Asian, you know, it's a megapole, so they compare it to Singapore and Hong Kong and all these places. And basically, if Japan had managed to improve the level of English, then more professionals would come. There have been some initiatives. I know the government has made initiatives to, you know, bring more foreign investment and create these English-speaking zones to help. I know that they've also put out startup visas with the process being in English, and you don't have to speak Japanese for those visas. There's also been discussions about doing like digital nomad visas. So there's attempts to catch this group. But I'm not sure if Japanese society as a whole understands how by not speaking English, it's affecting their ability to also, change the perception of
Yes,
people.
and missing opportunities.
And missing
Yeah.
opportunities. If you're a Japanese person who wants to, you have a business idea and you want to launch it overseas, you need to be able to present and pitch that idea in English
Absolutely.
to investors.
Right.
I've always felt that people speak a lot more English here than they think they do. So sometimes I just pretend not to speak Japanese. It's been a whole day just speaking English.
Okay.
And everything is okay, but it's that whole thing about going out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Japanese people, if they were surrounded by an only English environment, they would surprise themselves. Like, all that English you learn in school is in there. It's just,
Right.
it needs to come out.
Come out and like have confidence.
Yeah, and you need to have an opportunity to use it as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. Okay, Fatim, thanks for joining our show. I really enjoyed the
Thank
conversation.
you so much for having me. This has been really fun.